Hello, everyone, and welcome to Psych 155 Critical Thinking and Scientific Inquiry. My name is Dr. Mashaki, and I'll be your instructor for the course. Before viewing this PowerPoint, you should carefully read through the syllabus and the entire introduction of the course section on Canvas. Assuming everyone's done that, the first thing I want to explain is what information you'll be tested on from the PowerPoints. In this course, any information that's in black text on the PowerPoints is going to be fair game for the quizzes. Note that this information will also be listed on the study guide as topics that will be covered by the quizzes. And then anything in green text is primarily for examples only and isn't something you'll be directly tested on. Understanding the information in green will certainly help you with the information in black text, but again, you won't be directly tested on it. Anyway, let's get started with the lecture. Today in this video, I'll be covering an introduction to critical thinking. So let's start by trying to answer this question, what is critical thinking? And to do that, I want to ask you all a question, which is, do you believe in ESP, which stands for extrasensory perception? ESP includes a belief in clairvoyance, which is perceiving distant objects that are outside a person's field of view, a belief in telepathy, which is perceiving other people's thoughts, and a belief in precognition, which is perceiving future events before they happen. If you do believe in ESP, you're not alone. In surveys, about 41% of Americans report that they do believe in ESP, and similarly, this chart lists various other topics and the percent of people in surveys who report believing in them. And so, do you believe in ESP? And if so, what does this have to do with critical thinking? Well, what critical thinking is about is asking, why do you believe something? What evidence have you been given that ESP or any other statement from this chart is true? So here's our formal definition of critical thinking. Critical thinking is the evaluation of evidence related to a claim so that a sound conclusion can be drawn about that claim from the evidence. In other words, if you or someone else does believe in the types of claims I just showed you, is it because you were presented with good quality evidence that the phenomenon is real, or did you just decide to believe in something without being given a reason why? The essence of critical thinking, then, is that a claim is accepted or rejected based exclusively on the quantity and quality of its supporting evidence. So it's about demanding that evidence be presented if someone is making a claim, and then for the quantity and quality of evidence to be evaluated before deciding whether you should believe that claim or not. It's not about saying no or I don't believe that to every claim you hear, or to assume that anything which sounds weird must be wrong. As psychology majors, you've probably learned lots of unintuitive things about human thought and behavior that were nevertheless supported by good quality evidence, and so you chose to believe them. So instead, critical thinking is about taking this perspective. If you want me to believe in a claim, such as that ESP is real, that's fine, but you have to provide me with good quality evidence that the claim is true. And then when applicable, critical thinking also involves the use of the scientific method and the conducting of sound research. We'll spend some time talking about different types of research methods that are used in psychology and the strengths and limitations of these methods. We'll also talk about the scientific method and how it is superior to other ways of evaluating claims. Then we'll talk about pseudoscientific claims, and we'll see how these don't meet the characteristics of the scientific method. To get a better understanding of what is involved in critical thinking, let's take a look at the 3 steps in critical thinking. The first step is to identify and understand the claims that are being made and any assumptions that those claims make. So the first step in critical thinking is to ask yourself, what am I being asked to believe, or what are the different claims or possibilities? One thing that we'll discuss today is that people often have trouble taking other people's points of view or considering competing claims to ones that they already believe. You also need to ask yourself, what assumptions are being made about the world if I accept this claim? Assumptions are any implicit, unstated assertions that are being made about the world when one accepts a particular claim. For example, let's take the topic of psychics, people who claim to be able to speak with the dead. The point about assumptions is that there is more to it than simply believing that psychics can or cannot speak with the dead. For example, if you accept the claim that psychics can speak with the dead, you are making certain assumptions about the world which you may not realize and that you may not actually believe. Assumptions like that there is a spirit world where the dead are, that spirits in the spirit world can communicate with people on Earth, that psychics are special in that they, but not the rest of us, have mechanisms in their brains that allow them to send and receive information from the spirit world. as well as things like spirits are willing to share some information, but not all information with psychics, right? They can't solve murders or spy on foreign countries for us, but they can tell you where missing family heirlooms are. So again, the point is these things about the world may or may not be true, but when you accept the claim that psychics can speak with the dead, you are assuming they are true, whether you realize it or not. The second step in critical thinking is to gather and then evaluate the quantity and quality of the evidence relevant to each claim. This is where the critical part of critical thinking comes in, not to mean negative, but to emphasize evaluation. So, there might be evidence to support both competing claims. Some evidence that psychics can speak with the dead versus evidence that they can't speak with the dead. But does one side have more supporting evidence than the other? We also have to consider the quality of that supporting evidence. Later in this course, we'll look at 5 common types of evidence that people use to support claims, and we'll see that not all types of evidence are equal. Common sense evidence is probably less useful for determining the validity of a claim than statements from authority, for example. And then finally, the third step is to draw a conclusion about the validity of the claims based on the evidence. Ultimately, we have to decide what to believe about a claim after considering all of the evidence. Do we accept or reject that claim? Or we have to decide which of 2 competing claims is supported by the best quality evidence and thus should be accepted. Okay. Next, we're going to continue by discussing a phenomenon that's responsible for numerous failures in critical thinking. And that is confirmation bias. So first, to give you an example, in class I asked a question like, who believes we need more gun control in America? And let's say half of the class raises their hand. I then ask the people who raised their hand, what reasons or evidence do you have to support your claim that we need more gun control? And usually they can come up with lots of reasons, such as more gun control reduces the rates of mass shootings, or that more gun control makes it more difficult for criminals to get deadly weapons. Then I ask them, and again we're still talking about the people who believe we need more gun control in the US, what are some reasons why we need less gun control in America? This time I don't get as many responses. So the point of this example is that people who believe we need more gun control have trouble taking the opposite perspective, and they're not as familiar with the reasons or evidence that suggests less gun control may be more effective, such as to make it easier for law-abiding citizens to protect themselves. So overall, this example demonstrates confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to notice, accept, and remember evidence that supports one's beliefs, and to ignore, discount, or forget evidence that contradicts them. Confirmation bias says that for a given topic that you have an opinion on, you probably pay attention to or are more familiar with the evidence that supports your view, which you naturally find to be very convincing. Additionally, you probably don't pay attention to or you know a lot less about the evidence that contradicts your view, which you find to be less convincing. So people who support more gun control can think of lots of reasons why more gun control is advantageous, but they're less familiar with the evidence that would contradict their belief. Similarly, those who believe we need less gun control aren't as familiar with the evidence showing the advantages of more gun control. The reason why confirmation bias is a problem and leads to bad critical thinking is that it leads people to only consider evidence that supports their beliefs and not evidence that could show that they are wrong. As we were discussing in our definition of critical thinking and the 3 steps in critical thinking, in good critical thinking, you want to consider all of the evidence when comparing 2 claims, such as whether more or less gun control in America would be better. However, if you only ever consider half of the evidence about some claim, the evidence that supports the claim you happen to agree with, you're not going to be able to evaluate claims as effectively as you could if you were considering all the evidence. And moreover, if you happen to believe in a claim that's false, confirmation bias makes it difficult for you to fully consider the contradictory evidence and to get you to change your faulty beliefs. Finally, let's discuss a study in psychology that demonstrated how people fall victim to confirmation bias. This study was conducted by Lord, Ross, and Lepper, where participants read and then rated the quality of articles that presented evidence about whether the death penalty deters crime. The key manipulation was that the evidence was either consistent or inconsistent with the participants' views of the death penalty. So, the researchers presented subjects who already had an opinion about the death penalty with research about the death penalty that was either consistent with their views about the death penalty or that contradicted their views of the death penalty. Then after reading the article, Participants are asked to rate the quality of the evidence and to make note of any particularly strong arguments or problems with the evidence. So, just to make sure we all understand the study, there were two groups of participants. Group 1 consisted of participants who supported the death penalty. They first read an article that presented evidence suggesting that the death penalty was effective at deterring crime, and then they read an article that presented evidence suggesting that it was not effective at deterring crime. The opposite was true of Group 2. Group 2 consisted of participants who opposed the death penalty. They first read the anti-death penalty article, which stated that the death penalty does not deter crime, and then they read the pro-death penalty article that presented evidence showing that the death penalty does deter crime. So the key finding was that the participants showed confirmation bias. Articles that were consistent with the participants' views about the death penalty were rated as higher quality than ones that were inconsistent with their views about the death penalty. So specifically, people who supported the death penalty rated the pro-death penalty article as being of higher quality than the anti-death penalty article. The opposite was true for those who opposed the death penalty. They rated the same pro-death penalty article as being weaker and less convincing than the anti-death penalty article. We can see this in the ratings the people in two groups gave about the articles, about the quality of the evidence presented in the articles. First, for the article that presented evidence that the death penalty does deter crimes, the group that favored the death penalty rated the article as being of much higher quality than the group that opposed the death penalty. Similarly, for the participants who read the article suggesting that the death penalty does not deter crimes, the group that opposed the death penalty rated it as being of much higher quality than the group that supported the death penalty. So we see confirmation bias. Articles that were consistent with participants' views were rated as being higher quality than ones that were inconsistent with their views. We also see confirmation bias in participants' comments about the articles. For those who read the pro-deterrence article, people who favored the death penalty had much nicer things to say about the article than the people who opposed the death penalty, that were a lot more critical about the article and seemed to notice more of its flaws. And for the anti-deterrence article, people who opposed the death penalty had much nicer things to say about the article, whereas those who opposed the death penalty were better at detecting the article's flaws. Okay, that's it for this PowerPoint. Please post any questions or comments you have about the information in the discussion board.